Our first reading for this afternoon comes to us from Genesis, the 12th chapter. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your family and your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who cuts you off, I will cut off. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, just as the Lord had told him, and his brother Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And our second lesson connected to that is from James. You see that faith was active along with people's actions, and that faith was brought to completion by those actions. Thus the scripture was fulfilled that said, "Abraham believed in God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God." So you see that a person is made right with God by how they live out their life, and not only by their words. The Gospel of our Lord. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, amen. Now, I was talking to the family just before the service, and I was telling them that it's really hard to believe that we are actually here today, and that we're doing this. Hard to believe because Carl was incredibly fragile, at least during the time, these last 4 to 5 years that I've known him. In fact, Carl used to scare the absolute dickens out of me every Sunday, because he was here every Sunday, and he'd be sitting, well, there's his seat right there. He'd be sitting right there, and Carl would make sure that when it came time for communion, by golly gumdrops, he was going to get up here for communion. And you know what it was like over the last few years. And when he was trying to get up here, sometimes, I would be standing here and just willing him forward. "Please, Carl, not now. This would not be the best time, please." But boy, he was going to get up, and I told him 2 or 3 times. In fact, I told him so many times I finally just gave up. I said, "Carl, I can go back to you." No. He said, "This is good for me." And I was thinking to myself, "It may be good for you, but it's not good for me. It's good for me. I need to be able to get up there." And so every Sunday, there he would be, just like clockwork. He was fragile, but he was also like the Energizer Bunny. Or even better, how many of you remember, some of you probably don't even remember watches. The younger folks here that probably don't know what a watch is. But how many of you remember Timex watches? All right. And you remember what the slogan was that they had? Takes a licking and keeps on ticking. That was Carl. And Carl was also one of the first ones who, when I was here the very first Sunday, I was not really very used to kind of the patterns of what was going on. And I was standing right over there by the door and just yakking to people. And somebody opened up the door, and I had no idea that it was the practice of this congregation. I saw a car barreling down the sidewalk toward the door. And I thought, it's the end! Well, there's Carl's car. And so, I love the fact that everything that Carl did, every moment it seemed that he had this certain spark, that no matter what life threw his way, he was going to just kind of dig deep and he was going to do it. Takes a licking, keeps on ticking. But you know, Carl was also very much a realist. So when I was with him in the hospital, was it a month? A little over a month ago. I was with him and I was talking with him. Actually, if you know Carl, I was listening. Because he was talking and I was quiet. And Sue was trying to be really kind. She said, I'll go take a walk in the hallways. And I don't think she realized it was going to be like an hour and a half. I could hear the door crack open just a little bit, and she'd peek in and he'd be bumping up and up and up, still talking. And I'd hear the door close again, and off she'd go. But during the midst of that conversation, I finally got a word in, and I wanted to touch bases with him as his pastor too. And I said, so Carl, are you doing okay? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, Pastor, he said, I have had my bags packed for this trip for 3 years. He said, I am ready to go. That's Carl. Energizer bunny, takes a licking and keeps on ticking, but also somebody whose relationship with God was not flamboyant, but was just incredibly solid, and was simply not worried. This was just the next step in a long journey that he had had of being a friend and walking with God. Carl had deep roots. His faith, deep roots. And whenever I think of Carl and his faith, I can't help but think of the tree in their backyard. That tree that we raked the leaves from, fall after fall after fall. But even in this last few weeks, Carl would be sitting, laying in his bed, but looking out the window of their house and looking at that tree. That tree with its branches firmly planted in the air and its roots firmly planted in the ground. And I just kept thinking, Carl, you and that tree, you're one. During the hour and a half that Carl was talking, one of the things that he really wanted to talk to me about were all of his travels. It was like he was going to kind of run through the whole of his life, but it was like a Rick Steves travelogue. He started out talking about Pasadena, talked about Southern California, then talked about going into the Army or into the military? Air Force. And being in North Africa. Whoa, exotic. And then coming back and going up to Alaska. For what was it 10 years that he was up there? Long time. And then as he was talking about it, he said, you know, Pastor, he said, I got to this point that when I was getting ready to come back from Alaska, I realized that, this was one of those now or never kind of moments. That if I didn't cut loose a little bit, Carl cutting loose, but if I didn't cut loose a little bit and take a walk on the wild side, I probably would never get an opportunity to do it. So he said, I decided that I was going to go on my grand European tour. He said, I got a good pair of boots, I got a knapsack, and I went. With the clothes that I had on and an extra pair of clothes in the knapsack, and I took off. And he said, I had so much fun just walking around Germany. And he said, he said, I don't know for sure which town it was. It could have been Tübingen, maybe it was Heidelberg. He said, but I stayed at a hostel there, and he said, I had the best meal that I had ever had in my life. His eyes glazed over when he was talking about it. It's 50 years ago, plus, and yet he was still sent into rapture. He said they were sausages. Kind of hot dogs, he said. Really long, skinny, red, bright red hot dogs with hot sauerkraut. And he said, it's the best thing that I had ever tasted. Carl came back from Germany, went to Spokane, picked up a traveling companion on the way in Judy. They got married, and boom, here they were. And the road led them to us and to Poland. Carl on the road. Carl with his bags packed and ready to go. And you have to know that the journey that Carl started out on in Pasadena is a journey that continues. We often think of God in places, don't we? Holy and sacred places. We think of God on Mount Sinai, talking with Moses. We think of God in the temple, or we think of God here in this place, solid, rooted, sacred space. But when you read the Bible, you come to find out that God is, well, a bit of a vagabond. That God likes to wander about a bit. There's Abram, well situated in this town called Ur. And suddenly, the Lord visits him at night. Hey, let's take a walk. And 3,000 miles later, they stopped. Or you think about King David. When David was finally situated and settled in as king, and David had a really cool and grand palace, as was befitting a king, but he looked out and realized that God was still living in the tabernacle, and so he decided that he was going to build a temple. Had all the plans laid out until God visited David one night and said, Dave, appreciate the idea, man. But I kind of like living outside. I like living under the stars. I like living in a tent. I like living where I can be close to my people. There was a Russian holy man who was asked, what special characteristic does a person need to actually be classified as a saint or as a holy person? And the man thought and he pondered, and the person made some suggestions. He said, well, does it take a good mind? How about a deep and rich spirit? The man said. He said, you know, I was living in a village in Siberia when God's call came to me. And God told me to simply get up and start walking. So I walked and I walked, he said. I walked all the way across Russia. I walked down through the Balkans, walked up and over mountains and alongside seas. I walked until I came to Greece, and I walked down through the peninsula of Greece until I came to the end of the peninsula, and I couldn't walk anymore. So I turned around and I walked all the way back. He said, you ask me, what does it take to be a holy man? Good feet. Good feet. Carl was a man on a journey. He was a man on the road, ready for all of the twists and turns and adventures that life was going to bring him. J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, many people may not know that they were good friends, and they would often meet together in a pub, and one afternoon they decided to challenge each other to challenge each other, to be able to put their faith into a book, into a story, or into a novel that without being blatantly Christian would actually convey their faith. Being the Oxford people, they took up the challenge. C.S. Lewis wrote Narnia. J.R. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings. And in The Lord of the Rings, someone once asked him, what encapsulates for you the whole of the story? And Tolkien said, it's a poem. The poem, he said, is this. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet. And whither then, I cannot say. The road goes ever on and on, out from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone. Let others follow, those who can. Let them a journey new begin. But I, at last, with weary feet, will turn toward the lighted inn, my evening rest and sleep to meet. The road goes ever on and on. From Indianapolis to Southern California, to North Africa, to Alaska, to Germany with its sausages, back to Spokane to pick up Judy, the road leading to Pullman. And we folks, we were lucky enough to be his traveling buddies. Carl Erdering. What a good guy. What a deep down good guy. And a friend of God. We often think of God as the destination waiting for us at the end. And he is. But Carl also knew that God was his companion on the way. Well, Pastor, he said, my bags have been packed for this trip for about 3 years now. Keep walking, Carl. Keep on going, because you are in good company.